So if you wouldn't mind answering this question in the chat. So go into the chat feature, which is at the bottom of your screen, and answer this question. What gets in the way, or what has gotten in the way of you having a good assessment experience or your child having a good assessment experience?
I'll let you know when we have some comments here.
Okay.
Okay, child doesn't want to talk to a stranger about their behavior.
Absolutely. Who would?
Okay, we have a lot of you out there. I hope you'll give us some feedback here. 5 grandkids we are now parents to permanently that have a lot of baggage, trauma, and genetic issues. There is secondary trauma, and especially doing it 5 times at 3 hours each is a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the secondary trauma isn't actually doing the cans.
Yes. I completely agree. I once had a young person tell me how weird my job was because all I hear is about bad stuff kids do all day long. Right? Multiple
Another
cans
comment.
assessments. Yeah. Go ahead, Ruth.
Sorry, multiple cans assessments and repeating info.
Mm-hmm.
Very frustrating.
Very frustrating.
It's like there we go. Our assessments have been good, but have not resulted in any helpful services. So
that's a bummer.
Yeah.
That's a bummer. Here's another comment.
Exactly what you said earlier. Teen just now able to articulate symptoms.
Right. The secondary trauma is doing the cans. All right. I hear you loud and clear. And I am so sorry about that, right? Talking about my child in front of my child. He hates that. I don't blame him. Mine did too. Mine did too. Last call for some comments. Ooh, here's a good one. One time there was a language barrier. The assessor had a strong accent that kind of assessments. I'm sorry, I can't read that first sentence. My son has had 2 psychological tests where we lived in Florida, but I'm wondering about developmental assessment to see what age he really is operating at. But what is that called? It's exactly what you just called it, a developmental assessment. Is that different from the assessments we're talking about, right? Yes. So a developmental assessment and a psychological testing or psychological assessment or a psychological evaluation, those are different. Those are very specific types of testing situations. So I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm talking more generally about the assessments that happen when you're trying to get into just general mental health services. All right, you guys can keep adding things to this chat as you think of them or want to share. And Ruth can tell me when you've shared something. I'm going to move forward just to talk more about, just to move forward in my talk. So yesterday, Dr. Israel laid out very beautifully, he primed the pump for me, so to speak, about what happens, right, when we have a good assessment and how that can result in a really good plan. So one way to think about what happens after an assessment is that we start to develop a theory of how change will happen for your child. Okay, so here's in very broad brush strokes what happens with a completed assessment, right? The completed assessment helps us know where we are and what's happening. Hopefully, everyone who's involved is on the same page of knowing where we are and what's happening. Okay. Then we hopefully will develop a shared understanding from knowing what's happening as to where support could be helpful for your child and your family and how we're going to go about doing that, right? We're going to develop goals that represent the change we want to see happening, which is, you know, part of Dr. Israel's treatment pyramid. Okay. And then for all of those goals, we have to develop those action steps. We have to identify interventions And as he mentioned yesterday, as Dr. Israel mentioned yesterday, we have to make sure we're developing strengths as well as accessing the strengths that your child and your family have. So this is the theory of how change can happen with your family. It needs to be personalized and customized and developed just for your child and what's happening with them. I want to focus a little bit on these two sections right here. What goes on between a completed assessment, right, and getting to that shared understanding, because something happens there. It doesn't happen magically. Okay, so what's supposed to happen there? What's supposed to happen here is the information that the assessor has gathered about your child should be brought back in and shared with you so that you know everything that's been gathered, right? And hopefully it won't be a surprise to you, but there may be some aspects that are surprising, right? Because the assessor, you, and if they're old enough, your child to understand, your child should all understand what is going on, right? Here's everything. Here's how my anger, if I'm a young person who's angry, here's how my anger impacts school, impacts my sports, impacts everything I do, right? We need to get that kind of 360 view of what's going on, right? The assessment information then is going to inform, right, what we're identifying as needs and strengths, AKA the cans. It's going to, like, once we complete the cans, it's going to then help us understand that level of care, right? What the recommendation is for the level of care. All that assessment information also helps us understand a diagnosis, right? Which is really important in order for us to understand how we're going to approach providing support or providing care. The other thing the assessment information does, and this might be a different way of thinking about it, is determining clinical focus, right? Are we addressing why something is happening, right? The underlying issues versus we know why and we're addressing what? We're trying to understand how do we maintain, right, good functioning for example, kids who have are on the autism spectrum, who have developmental delays, right? We know some things won't change for some individuals or some young people, but we can always try to help maintain gains and move them forward in their functioning. So are we looking at the why or are we looking at the what? Okay, this is what's going to help us get to that shared understanding and have some consensus on what are we going to focus on and how are we going to get the help we need. Okay, that's what should happen. It shouldn't be a magical process between the assessment being done and then all of a sudden you have a plan. This should be something that you as a parent are included and engaged in participation to develop, to understand what's going on, take the information, and then determine how to move forward. That's a big part of the steps to understanding the process of care.